So according to whitehouse.gov, 65% of America's major roads are rated in less than good condition. 25% of our bridges require significant repair or can't handle today's traffic. And 45% of Americans lack access to transit. These are just a few reasons why Congress and the American government needs to reauthorize funding to improve America's transportation infrastructure. So I'm going to make a couple points today about why this needs to happen, and the first one is economic. A high-quality transportation network is vital to a performing economy. For example, the implementation of the railroads and the Erie Canal in the 1800s are just two examples of transportation infrastructure that propelled our economy to the next level. However, today's inefficient and out-of-date transportation infrastructure cannot and will not keep up with the growing demands of our economy. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, current road congestion costs American drivers $101 billion annually in wasted time and fuel, as well as airport delays that are a $22 billion drag on the economy. Adding on to that, companies like Nike must spend an additional $4 million per week to carry an extra 7 to 14 days of inventory to compensate for these inefficient transportation infrastructure problems. However, with an increase in infrastructure spending, the economy can see a long-term benefit through a higher amount of efficiency, creation of jobs, and higher land value and higher local economic development. For example, Standard & Poor's calculated that a $1.3 billion project will create a real economic gain of $2 billion in the immediate future, with an unknown positive effect in the long term. With the new transportation network, we can allow businesses to manage inventories, transport goods more cheaply, access a variety of suppliers and markets for their products, and get employees reliably to work. American families benefit as well, as consumers from lower-priced goods and as workers by gaining better access to jobs. Infrastructure investment can also raise property values and bring about improvements to local living standards. Research done by Bernard Weinstein suggests that proximity to public transit raises the value of residential and commercial real estate. And lastly, the most rippling effect of increased transportation infrastructure is job creation. Just think about all the jobs that are created with construction workers needed on site, all the tools to make these changes, and everything that just keeps happening after the initial thing is passed. The effect is so strong, and the jobs that would be created would be a huge addition to our economy. The second point I want to make today is in regards to increasing transportation investment is our health and safety as individuals and American citizens. According to the President's Council of Economic Advisors, there were more than 33,000 traffic fatalities last year alone, and roadway conditions factored into 1/3 of these traffic fatalities. Such fatalities occur disproportionately in rural America, in part because of the inadequate road conditions. However, these road conditions are not the only problem that inefficient transportation infrastructure causes to our health. More road congestion leads to more stop-and-go traffic, which leads to more harmful emissions of greenhouse gases. This is because your car actually burns more fuel as it is trying to accelerate. So when you accelerate and then stop, accelerate and stop, and so if you think from the 9 to 5, when you're going to work, going back from work, how much emission is just being created in that hour delay. So a study done by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, announced that transportation accounts for 1/3 of all carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel combustion, and these emissions are particularly harmful to children's health. President Obama was quoted saying, no challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change. This is why we need to implement new and clean technologies in our transportation, like autonomous or self-driving vehicles, while that will reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, cut out carbon pollution, and strengthen our resilience to the impacts, of climate change. That is why President Obama has already started the charge by laying out a budget with a bold new plan for building a 21st century clean transportation system, funded by a new fee paid by oil companies. However, we're going to need more than just one plan. And it's not just traffic accidents and air control that are affecting our health. The amount of time spent in our daily commutes is not good for our mental health or our posture. According to research done by Newsweek.com, USA commuters spend an average of 42 hours per year in traffic just commuting to and from work. This means by the time we retire, roughly we would have spent about 75 days of our lives just sitting in traffic commuting to and from work. I don't know about you, but that sounds horrendous. With more efficient roads and traffic control, we could have more time to spend with our families, breathe cleaner air, and worry less about accidents out on the road. And the only way this is possible is by allocating more money to our transportation infrastructure. In conclusion, I would continue to point out more facts, but I feel like I've clearly gotten my message across more than once. Investing in infrastructure is essential to the economic health of the nation. Increasing this investment in our nation's infrastructure will better meet the needs of a growing population, a growing economy, and growing workforce, as well as aid in producing one. The economic and environmental case for investment in our long-term infrastructure is clear. We know it will grow the economy, create good jobs, and position us for long-term growth and resilience to future climate change by integrating smart and new technologies. The time to act is now. This is why I challenge you to get involved and informed. Since a large amount of infrastructure is handled at the state level, keep informed on potential bills as well as candidates and get informed on their stances on government spending and what they think should go where, because in the end it truly affects all of us.
My opponent believes we should spend more on transportation infrastructure. I believe we should do the opposite. At the federal level, we spent $85 billion on transportation alone in 2015, according to nationalpriorities.org. That excludes state and private funding. I agree that we should be spending government money on transportation infrastructure, but the amount we spend and where we spend it is the problem. I believe we should spend less on transportation infrastructure because the vague transportation laws, environmental impacts, and bad investments. In 2015, Barack Obama passed the FAST Act law, which stands for Fixing America's Surface Transportation. From an article by Stephen Lee Davis in Transportation for America, the FAST Act law will spend $230 billion for highways, $60 billion for public transportation, and $10 billion for railroads, and $5 billion for safety highway programs. The bill isn't specific enough to state what exact programs they're going to use and what building corporations the money will go to. There is a high possibility there will be money left over. And Katie Crabb believes that the bill is filled with industry giveaways and buoyed by several years of funding that relies on budget gimmicks and sleight-of-hand accounting tricks. The monetary dilemma is not the only issue with transportation infrastructure. A statement by a research paper released from the European Commission says that the largest impacts come from transportation use, but the effects from development and construction on infrastructure and vehicle use, as well as the waste from their disposal, add to the environmental costs of transportation. Another study from Dr. Jean-Paul Rodriguez states that 15% of CO2 emissions are attributed to the transportation sector alone. That percentage is going to increase if we don't make a change. By investing more into the transportation infrastructure, we use environmentally hazardous machines to make roads for CO2 emitting cars to drive on. We need people who understand this problem to control the funding. There have been multiple incidences where funding for the transportation sector is a bad investment. The Bridge to Nowhere is an incomplete bridge in Alaska that would have connected the town of Ketchikan with a population of 9,000 people to an airport on an island of Graviana with a population of only 50 people, at the cost of the federal taxpayers of $300 million, according to an article by Ronald Budd. That is not the only case where we've made a bad investment. The Department of Transportation spent $500 million to repaint the Brooklyn Bridge, according to an article by Ira Stoll. As you can see, the taxpayers' money is used in a very unproductive way. I believe the Department of Transportation the money from the Department of Transportation is used in a very efficient way. Therefore, we should limit the amount funded in that category. There are plenty of other sectors that the money could be used proficiently. I hope I've shown you all enough information to support my case.
So just to point out some things that he said, how much we already spend on transportation infrastructure, that number actually has been the same for quite some time now. I don't know the exact years, but it hasn't increased. And then construction costs right now are actually decreasing. So if we were going to do it right now would be a good time. And he also pointed out that poor investments or current construction laws and things are poor investments right now, and they're handled poorly. And I think that's why we need to allocate more money and create new bills and plans to create better investments. And right now in the world, I believe we're 25th in transportation infrastructure, and we need to improve that number to stay competitive as the world continues to grow and businesses become more international and everything becomes more interlinked. And if we want to stay competitive and on top, we need these things. And another point that was made was how much construction costs with CO2 throws out CO2 emissions. But if we do clean roads now, it'll help us more in the long term as opposed in the short term of just cars releasing emissions today and tomorrow.
I do agree with John that we should spend on transportation infrastructure, but we're not using it in a very efficient way. Investing in the transportation infrastructure, or the transportation sector, is a positive feedback loop. And the positive feedback loop may sound good, but it's a negative attribute. It means that if we invest in more on one sector, we're going to have to invest on more on the other sector, like environmental. Therefore, I believe that we should limit the amount funded to the sector and use it in a very efficient way. Get people to realize that, to put people in the position to control the sector.
So, in conclusion, I think America should increase its transportation infrastructure investment to increase the economy and long-term and increase climate change, or increase our resilience to climate change in the long term, because things are only going to get worse, so I believe that we should act now.
Concluding my point, I think we should spend less on transportation. The amount we spend is just not using it all in the way we should be spending it. If we allocate more money to that sector, we would be using it very wisely instead of giving a bunch of money to them and then them not using it in a very very efficient way, so they can just live free and like not do it, not have